All right, we're going to get started in this class talking about just an introduction to human anatomy. So, first of all, just some terminology to start with. Anatomy defined is the study of the structures of the human body, specifically when we're talking about human anatomy. And you see two bullet points here under anatomy, and this kind of divides the study of anatomy into two parts, one microscopic, the other macroscopic, also known as gross. So when we study structures that are too small to see with the naked eye, that would be microscopic anatomy, and commonly we use a microscope to see those things. That would be like cells or certain molecules or tissues of the body that are too small to see with the unaided eye. And then macroscopic are things that in anatomy that we can see when we don't need any visual help, such as bones, muscles, etc. Physiology is another term that goes along with anatomy, and this is not a true physiology course, but physiology defined is the study of the function of those structures in the human body. So anatomy is the study of the structure. Physiology is more the study of the function. So obviously we're going to talk a little bit about both in this class, but we'll focus on anatomy. But it's sometimes hard to talk about the structures without talking about the function. So we will cover some basic physiology in this class also. So the human body is very organized, and it's broken down into these levels of organization. So starting at the smallest level, we have the chemical level. That would be like atoms and molecules that get together. Those atoms and molecules get together to form cells, and we call that the cellular level. So cells are the basic units of structure and function. The next lecture after this one will be on cytology, which is the study of cells. Cells get together and form tissues. So tissues are a group of cells working together, and there's 4 types of tissues in the human body. They are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. That's it. Those are the only 4 tissues in the body. Everything else can fall into one of those tissues. Then we have the organ level. So tissues get together and form organs. An organ might be the liver or the heart. And an organ is 2 or more tissue types working together to form a structure that has a specific function. And then we have the system level, or the organ system level, and this is a group of related organs working together to perform a specific function. This could be like the cardiovascular system, which consists of the heart and the blood vessels and the blood all working together. Then all these systems get together and make up the entire organism, and we'll call that the organismal level. So here's a picture of what we just talked about. So from least complex to most complex, we have these different levels of organization. All right, characteristics of living things, including humans. We have these terms. I'll just kind of give you a quick definition of what we mean by these terms, but all living things have these characteristics. And since we're talking about humans, humans are no different. So first of all, they're very organized. Like we just talked about, there's the different levels of organization. We exhibit metabolism. And so metabolism defined is the sum of all of the chemical reactions occurring in the body. So you may have taken a chemistry class where you learned about chemical reactions. And so some of those reactions kind of build up things in the body. Some of those reactions break down things in the body. So taken together, that all of those reactions occurring reflect our metabolism. So the reactions that build up molecules are called anabolic. Those reactions that break down molecules are called catabolic. Growth and development sound similar, but there is a difference. So growth just means we get bigger as through a certain point of our lives. So we get bigger and increase in size. Development means we become more complex. So if you think of an organ like the brain, so the brain obviously becomes more complex as you go from being an infant to an adult. Responsiveness, or sometimes called irritability, is the ability of the body to respond to some stimulus. So for instance, if you stepped on something that hurt, you have the ability to remove your foot from that object so you can respond. Or if somebody tells you something, you can respond to them. Regulation means you have the ability to kind of maintain things in the body or regulate things in the body. Things like blood pressure, temperature is a good example of this. pH. So the body's real good at maintaining things within a certain range. And then reproduction just means, well, it actually could mean two things. So it could mean reproducing an entire human being, like a woman giving birth, or it could mean a cell of the body dividing and becoming a new cell and basically replicating itself. Some cells of the body can do that. So these are the major systems we're going to go through in this class. So I'll just run through these, and this gives you an outline of the whole semester, actually. So the integumentary system is the skin and accessory organs. That might include the hair, the nails, and big function. Although there's several functions to all these systems, I'll kind of target the big one. The big function is protection. Move to the bones. So skeletal system. So the bones, another function of the bones would be protection and also support. And movement, if you want to include how the bones work with the muscles, so skeletal muscles. Moving on to the muscular system, specifically this is what we call skeletal muscle, and the big function of skeletal muscle is movement. Moving on to the nervous system. So the nervous system consists of all these nerves running through the body, the brain, the spinal cord, and the big function here is communication. And the way the nervous system communicates with different parts of the body is electrical. So it's an electrical communication system within the body. The endocrine system consists of glands such as the thyroid, the testes, the ovaries, the pancreas. And these are called endocrine glands, and they actually secrete hormones. And these hormones travel in the blood and allow different parts of the body to communicate. So a big function of the endocrine system is the same as the nervous system. It's communication. But the way it communicates is different. So it's chemical with hormones as opposed to electrical that you see in the nervous system. The cardiovascular system consists of the heart, the blood vessel, and the blood vessels and the blood. And big function here is going to be transportation. So things are transported through the body in the blood through the blood vessels. And so things such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients such as carbohydrate and fat, hormones, all those things have to travel through the body in the blood. So the cardiovascular system has a key role of transportation. The lymphatic system looks kind of similar to the cardiovascular, but it's different. It doesn't contain blood. It contains something called lymph, but its main function is immunity. So this is your immune system. It helps fight off infection and disease. The respiratory system consists of the lungs and the airways, and this is how we get oxygen into the body and exhale lots of carbon dioxide as a waste product. So gas exchange is a big function here, or breathing in general. Digestive system consists of these accessory organs and something called the GI tract that runs through the body, gastrointestinal tract, your intestines, stomach, and then even the esophagus, which is how food gets down to the stomach. So all of that's the digestive system. Obviously, the key function is going to be digestion, so breaking down food and absorbing it. Urinary system consists of the kidneys, urinary bladder, and some other accessory structures. So function of the urinary system is excretion or elimination of waste. Then we have the reproductive system, male versus female. The male reproductive system, the key organ is going to be the testes. Female is going to be the ovaries, and the function of both is going to be reproduction. So that gives you a quick overview of kind of where we're going to go in this class. So backing off a little bit, we'll talk about some more terminology and other things to consider. There's something called the anatomical position. And this is a reference point that's used in human anatomy. So if you look at this woman standing here, she is in the anatomical position. So the anatomical position is standing upright, facing forward, and the palms facing forward. And you're going to learn this term later, but when your palms are facing forward like this is known as a supinated position. So this is the anatomical position. that we use as a reference point in anatomy. So planes and sections. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sections first, and then we'll move into planes. But a section is an actual cut or slice through something. So if we were examining an organ and we wanted to see what it looks like on the inside, we could cut it and look at what's inside. But it's going to look different depending on how we cut it. So here's a picture from the textbook, but I'm going to just focus on this picture that I drew because I think it's a little bit easier to look at. So a section is actual cut or slice. So imagine that we had an organ that kind of looked like this, like a tube. This could be part of your intestines. And if you cut it like where this yellow line is and look at it, it's going to look completely different than if you look at it after you cut it where this red line is. And so we have two major types of sections that we can make. We can make what we call a cross section, which is where we kind of cut across the long axis of a part of the body, or we can look at a longitudinal section. So longitudinal section is going along or with the longitudinal axis or the long axis of a structure. So cross section cuts across, longitudinal goes with the long axis. A plane is a little bit different. So there's different like established planes in the body, and a plane is an imaginary flat surface that passes through either the entire body or just a part of the body. So there's three major planes, and then I'm going to add a fourth. So sagittal plane divides the body into left and right. So that would be this one going right down the middle. So sagittal plane divides the body into left and right. Now, if it's dead center in the middle, we can also call it a mid-sagittal plane, but it could also be a sagittal plane out here somewhere if it still divides the body into left and right. Coronal divides the body into front and back. The coronal plane is also called the frontal plane, and it separates the body into the front and the back. And then transverse, also known as the cross-sectional or horizontal plane, divides the body into top and bottom. And again, it doesn't have to be dead center. It could be here or here. Same with the coronal. It doesn't have to be in the dead center. But as long as it divides the body into those respective regions, it is the plane that we described. And lastly, there's no picture of this, but if a plane cuts across at an angle, it's called an oblique plane. And there's no set way that it goes. But if it's at any angle whatsoever, it's called an oblique plane. You'll see the term oblique a lot in anatomy. It just means at an angle. All right, some directional terms. So I'll put some more up here, but we'll go through the pictures first. So these are terms that you definitely need to know. They're commonly used in anatomy. And they come in pairs. So anterior means towards the front of the body. Posterior means towards the back. I'm going to jump down here just for a minute because these mean this exact same thing. Dorsal means towards the back. Ventral means towards the front. So these are two different ways to say the same thing. So easy way to remember that: dorsal, think of a dorsal fin on a fish or a shark, and that means towards the back. Ventral means belly side, so that's towards the front. Superior means towards the top. Inferior towards the bottom, or towards the head, towards the feet. Medial and lateral are terms describing the relationship to the midline of the body. So for these, just assume that there's an imaginary line running through the middle of the body. And if something is towards that midline, it's medial. If it's more away from that midline, it's lateral. So example of that would be, for instance, the right arm is lateral to the chest. So it's away from that midline. Proximal and distal have to do with the limbs. So for proximal and distal, there's a point of attachment, and that would be the shoulder for the arms, the hip for the legs. And if something is more towards the point of attachment, it's proximal. If it's away from the point of attachment, it's distal. So for instance, we could say the elbow is proximal to the hand because it's closer to the point of attachment. Or we could say the foot is distal to the knee because it's further away from the point of attachment. Then some other terms that are used, caudal and cranial. We don't use that much in human anatomy, but caudal literally means tail end. Cranial means towards the head. So kind of like superior and inferior, but a little bit different. So caudal is more used in animals. So if you think of like a dog, caudal would be like where the tail is, where the butt is. Cranial would be towards the head. Deep and superficial have to do with how close things are to the surface. So superficial means towards the surface, deep means away from the surface. So you could say, for instance, the heart is deep to the rib cage, or the vice versa, the rib cage is superficial to the heart. So these are two terms that'll come back throughout the semester: axial and appendicular. So axial refers to the axis of the body, basically the head, neck, trunk, torso of the body. And appendicular refers to the limbs and appendages. So for instance, the arm is part of the appendicular part of the body. We could say the chest is part of the axial region of the body. All right, here's some regional terms, and I'm going to run through these, and you should definitely know these. These will become second nature throughout the semester. But some of these are going to be obvious, some are going to be a little bit strange. But so nasal refers to the nose, oral, mouth. Cervical refers to the neck region. So we have cervical vertebra. Deltoid refers to the shoulder. I think we have deltoid muscles out there. Axillary, armpit. Brachial refers to your upper arm. Antecubital refers to that little crease in the front of your elbow. Antebrachial means forearm. Coxal means hip. Carpal, wrist. Palmar means the palm of the hand. Digital means finger or toes. So digits are fingers or toes. Femoral means the thigh region. Patellar means the front of the knee, where the kneecap is. Crural means the lower leg. Sometimes another term is used here, sural, S-U-R-A-L. So crural or sural mean leg. Pes means foot. Sometimes ped, like pedal, P-E-D, is used also. Dorsum of the foot means the top of the foot. Tarsal means the ankle. Pubic, where the reproductive organs are. Pubic region would be here. Pelvic region, kind of where your hip bone, front of your hip bones are. Inguinal is this area right here to the side of the pubic region. So it's your groin area. Abdominal is your abdomen area. And this whole area here is called the thoracic area, and we can divide it into sub areas. So mammary is kind of where the nipples are. Overall chest region itself, pectoral. Think about where the chest muscles are. Sternal refers to where your sternum is, our breastbone. The chin is the term used here is mental. It's a little bit different. Buccal means cheek. Orbital means eye. This eye sockets are called orbits. Frontal, forehead region. And we have a big bone here called the frontal bone. And then cephalic refers to the head. And if we look at the backside, we get a lot of the same things, but a little bit different. So I'll run through these also. Cranial, surrounding the brain. Otic is a good one, means ear. Thoracic, again, we did. Vertebral refers to the region where the backbone is. The back of the elbow is called the olecranal region. Sacral, kind of where your sacrum is right here, just above the butt. Gluteal means where your butt is. Dorsum of the hand, just like we had dorsum of the foot, so the back of the hand. Crural, again for the leg, or sural. Calcaneal, heel. Popliteal is the back of the knee. Femoral again. Perineal, right behind the reproductive organs. We did antebrachial. Lumbar means lower back. We did abdominal, brachial, deltoid. Lastly, occipital, kind of the back of the head or the base of the skull. So be familiar with these regional terms. But like I said, after you learn these are going to become second nature throughout the course. So moving on to body cavities, just a brief introduction. There's two major body cavities, posterior and anterior. So the posterior is pretty easy. It consists of the cranial cavity, which which holds the brain, and then the vertebral cavity, which surrounds the spinal cord. So that's the posterior. The anterior, a little more complex, but not so much. So this is the anterior cavity. So it consists of the thoracic, which contains the heart and lungs. And then we have the abdominopelvic, which is all of this. And the abdominopelvic is divided into two separate regions, abdominal, which would be like where all your intestines are, and then the pelvic, which is more where you find the urinary bladder and reproductive organs. So abdominopelvic, abdominal, pelvic, thoracic. So all that fits into the anterior body cavity. And you can see from this picture why this is anterior and why this is posterior, because this is in the back. All right, this is not a cavity, but it's a space. So this space is called the mediastinum. It's just a space that includes the heart and some other structures. The heart is the big thing here. So if you look at a cross section of the level of the heart, you can see that the heart sits between the lungs. It's in front of the vertebra, and it's behind the sternum or breastbone. So that space that's surrounded by all those things, surrounded by the breastbone, the lungs, and the vertebra, that's called the mediastinum. And that's where the heart sits. So it's a space, it's not a cavity. It's not a true cavity, but it's a space that includes the heart. All right, so a little bit about membranes. So membranes are involved with cavities, but serous membranes are membranes in the body that surround some organs. There's a few specific organs that are surrounded by these serous membranes. So a serous membrane, by definition, is going to have two layers. The inner layer is called visceral, the outer layer is parietal. So if we look at this going around the heart, you can see that there's a two-layered membrane surrounding the heart, and that inner layer is called the visceral layer, the outer layer is called the parietal layer, and between the two we have a cavity. So that little blue space would be the cavity. It's called a serous cavity, and it contains fluid that's called serous fluid. The function of these serous membranes is really just to protect the organs. So you get this little fluid layer that kind of cushions and reduces friction around some organs. So the three major serous membranes that we have, one surrounds the heart, it's called the pericardium. One surrounds the lung, it's called the pleura. And those two are shown here in this picture. And so just like we name those layers, we have, if we're talking specifically about the heart, we have a parietal pericardium and a visceral pericardium. Talking about the lungs, we have a parietal pleura and a visceral pleura, along with the pleural cavity. And then the one big serous membrane in the abdominopelvic region is called the peritoneum. You can see this gets a little more complex as it goes all around your intestines, but same thing, you'll have a visceral layer and a parietal layer. Those are labeled, but it's a little bit harder to see. And the cavity between the two is called the peritoneal cavity that has the serous fluid in it. All right, so finishing up here with this introduction, we're going to kind of look at ways to describe regions within the abdominopelvic area. So these are called abdominopelvic regions. So if you draw two imaginary lines across, one kind of at the top of your hip bone, another kind of around the base of the ribs, and then we have two vertical lines right around the area of the nipples. So we get 9 regions. So in the center, we call this the umbilical region. Above that, epigastric. Below that, hypogastric. So that's a good way to get started. Hypo meaning below, epi meaning above. Then if we go out to the right and left lumbar regions, which are, think of your lower back area. That's about the region it would be. And then going down where your hip bones are, right and left iliac regions. And then lastly, right and left hypochondriac regions. So these are useful to describe kind of the location of certain organs in these areas. And so if we kind of go through the different areas, this gives you an idea of some of the major organs found there. And there's obviously some overlap here. So epigastric, you get a big part of the liver, which is this organ, part of the stomach, some of the pancreas, adrenal glands, small intestine. So obviously the big thing here is the liver. Umbilical, lots of intestines. So colon, which is the large intestine, and then lots of your small intestine. Hypogastric, big thing here would be the bladder. That makes it unique. You still get the intestines, but the bladder is important. There's the urinary bladder. So right hypochondriac, left hypochondriac, you're getting for the right, big thing that stands out here, like part of the liver again, and the gallbladder, which you can't see here, but the gallbladder is a structure attached to the liver. Left hypochondriac, getting a little bit of the stomach, which is this. Big thing here would be the spleen. So spleen is a lymphatic or immune organ that's found right here against your rib cage. And then part of the kidneys on either side. Right lumbar, left lumbar, you still get the intestines. The other thing here, you just get, there's something called the cecum, which we'll get back to with the digestive system. So we'll talk about that at another point in time. But really, it's just lots of intestines in here. And then the iliac region, big thing here, specifically on the right side, you're going to get your appendix. A little bit of intestines in each, but something called your vermiform appendix hangs off your large intestine right here. So appendix. All right, to make this a little bit simpler, a lot of times in clinical situations, they use quadrants instead of regions, just a little bit easier. So this time we're just going to have two lines. So one in the middle going down, one going across, intersecting about where the umbilicus is, or belly button. So we call these quadrants. So right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left lower quadrant. Notice the abbreviations. Those are commonly used in clinical situations to describe a pain someone may be having. But same thing, like you can see from this picture, although it's not as clear, what organs kind of fall into which. So the liver is mainly going to be in the right upper quadrant, stomach mainly in the left upper quadrant, gallbladder is right here, right upper quadrant. Appendix that I talked about is right here, so right lower quadrant. For left lower quadrant, mainly just intestines. But this is just another way to kind of look at it. It's a little bit simpler, actually.